Welcome to Calf Academy, your source for calf care education.
This section on the Calf Academy is about calf issues that happen early in the life of the calf and some potential things that we can do about it. The dairy industry has made remarkable progress in increasing the amount of milk that is harvested per cow over the past few years. Milk production is increasing rapidly, and the focus has been on nutrition and genetics and cow comfort. And they've had a remarkable level of success. However, the progress in performance in growing calves has not been as successful. As a matter of fact, over the last few years, the changes in pre-weaning mortality have been very, very small, if any improvement at all. As you can see in this graph, the pre-weaning mortality in 1991 is 8.4%. 2007, it was 7.8%. And the other features of measures of growing calves have stayed pretty much the same. When we look at the heifer deaths pre-weaning, it's just what we'd expect, is scours and pneumonia are the two leading causes of heifer deaths. And when we look at the years from 1991 to 2007 where this was measured, it is virtually unchanged in both types of diseases. So the Dairy Calf and Heifer Association put a task force together to establish what should we expect from a calf performance standpoint. And they looked at it from the standpoint of 24 hours of age to 60 days of age, or at weaning. And what they're suggesting is that calves should double their birth weight during that time period, from birth to weaning. And then in the next 60 days, from day 61 to 120 days, we'd get a very rapid gain where we should expect to see 2.2 pounds per calf per day average gain. And then after that 120-day period from days 121 to 180, the gain is going to slow down somewhat to 2 pounds per day. So that's the expectation of calf growth over that period of birth to 180 days. So when the Dairy Calf and Heifer Association looked at calf health, they wanted to make sure that the focus was on the right areas as far as mortality or death of the calf, scours morbidity, or morbidity means did they have the disease, and so scours and respiratory morbidity. So for mortality, from 24 hours of age to 60 days of age, we want less than 5% of the calves die during that period, less than 2% from 61 to 120, and less than 1% die between 121 to 180 days. When we look at scours, and that scours that requires some type of treatment after 24 hours of age, we'd expect calves to be less than 25% of them in a herd that would come down with a treatable scours. That should be a reasonable goal. And then certainly after weaning, the amount of scours or diarrhea in these animals is going to be markedly less at 2% and even 1%. When we look at respiratory disease, one that requires an injectable antibiotic treatment, that should be relatively low at less than 10% in that pre-weaning phase. Post-weaning is where you're going to see the highest level of respiratory disease, and the Dairy Calf and Heifer group recognized that, but they still had the level at less than 15% of the animals would get sick with pneumonia and require an injectable antibiotic. So when we get into the calf facility, into the calf herd, and actually start working with our calves, when we're thinking about health and growth, just what is important? What are the key factors? One of the most important things that we have to recognize in raising calves is that calves are born with very little of their own ability to fight off disease. This thing called immunity is very, very immature in the baby calf, the one that's just born. So the calf depends on colostrum, first milk that comes from the cow. The colostrum is full of antibodies that provides the immediate immunity that these calves need to fight off disease. Vaccinations, if they're properly timed during this early period, can help, but next to colostrum, nutrition is going to be our single biggest effort in trying to enhance the immunity and the ability of the calf to fight off these diseases. Now, all of that, the immunity part gets balanced against what is the load of pathogen that the calf is exposed to, the number of disease-causing organisms, bacteria, viruses, protozoa that's going to be presented to the calf. So that's where we think about biosecurity, we think about sanitation, and what type of housing. And specifically in housing, is it clean, dry, and comfortable? Is the air quality good? So let's think about that balance always of the immunity of the calf versus the pathogen load. Even the calves with the best immunity can have a struggle if the pathogen load is very, very high. So when we talk about colostrum, we always talk along the terms of passive transfer. Passive transfer simply means the ability of the antibodies that's in the colostrum to get into the bloodstream of the calf. And if this passive transfer is successful, we have reduced treatment, we have reduced death, we have better growth rates, we have better feed efficiency. We have calves that enter their first calving period at a younger age. And we have also evidence that the first and second lactation milk production is improved with calves that have improved passive transfer. So if a calf still has good passive transfer, what happens to calves that still get sick? Why do they get sick? Well, one of the things we have to keep in mind is the antibodies that are absorbed into the bloodstream of the calf, they slowly go away. They get used up. And the question is, how long do they last? Well, half of the antibodies are gone by about 16, 17 days of age. But what happens during this time period, that first 2 to 3 weeks, is some of the calf's own immunity will start to develop, but is still fairly low. The white blood cells, the leukocytes, they have not changed very much. They don't have as much activity. The bactericidal factors that are in the plasma have not really got into the strong ability to fight off disease. And calves are still at risk, especially in that early period of 14 to 21 days of age. The question always comes about is, well, where do those antibodies go? Well, a good share of them get resecreted into the interior of the intestine, into the lumen of the intestine. So this resecretion will be very, very important and necessary for the calf to help fight off these enteric diseases, the scours types of problems that calves can have commonly at that age. But, that helps explain, where some of these antibodies go, that the half-life would then be around that 16, 17 days. So when we have calves get older, as they grow, the risk of dying becomes less and less. So the risk changes a little bit from scours, enteric disease, or diarrhea to respiratory disease. And all of these things are all about what we can do to help the calf improve their immunity. If we understand why they get sick, what factors are most important, we can do a great deal to help prevent them from getting sick and die. So let's look at the blood antibodies, the antibodies that come from colostrum, and those antibodies that the calf creates themselves as a result of being exposed to different pathogens. So the colostral antibodies, as we've already talked about, they drop off over time until they get to the point where there's not very many of the colostral antibodies left at all. And we get at that intersection where the calves' own antibodies are starting to increase, but they still don't increase quite enough. So there's that period in that 2 to 3 week period potentially where the amount of antibody available to help keep the calf healthy is at a very low level. But as the calf reaches that level, their intestinal tract becomes more mature. The immaturity in this intestinal tract when they're first born takes a while to develop, and what we like to do during that period is keep the nutrition and the feeding strategies very consistent. That really will help that calf get through that stage of intestinal development and the immunity that is present from the colostrum and the immunity that they start to develop themselves. Are there things that we can do with feed additives that can help the calf during this time period? And the term that's often used for these type of feed additives is bioactive. In other words, they actively help the biology of the calf prevent disease or help them get through disease situations. So let's talk about these bioactive feed additives in depth. There are basically two goals of feed additives. One is to kill the bad bugs, the bad things that happen to a calf, like the bacteria, the viruses, protozoa. And the other thing we can do is help enhance the beneficial bacteria, the good bugs that are present in the intestinal tract. So it's oftentimes a two-pronged approach, to use these type of feed additives to help the calf. So there are 5 basic approaches of using these bioactive compounds to help a calf. We can think about egg yolk antibodies. We can think about a product like SmareCare. We'll talk a little bit about a little later. There's moss, the mannan oligosaccharides. There's direct-fed microbials, and there's essential oils that are all bioactive types of additives beyond what we think about in the terms of maternal colostrum or maternal antibodies. So let's talk a little bit more about these egg yolk antibodies. They're oftentimes referred to as IgY, immunoglobulin Y. It's the typical type of antibody that we think about coming from chickens. So what we have is donor hens that are vaccinated for these calf diseases. The most common calf diseases like rotavirus, coronavirus, crypto. The hens can be vaccinated for that. And then what they do is they put that immunity that the hen develops into their egg yolk. So this IgY becomes part of the egg yolk, and presumably that's how the chicken helps their own offspring, transfer that immunity to the chicks. So this IgY concentration is fairly high. It can be 50 to 100 milligrams of these IgY type of antibodies. So the chicken's vaccinated, produces the antibody, the IgY antibody in the egg. The egg yolk is dried, and then that egg yolk is put into preparation that can be added to the milk replacer. And what that does then, it gives the intestine of the calf a constant bathing of these IgY antibodies to help fight off these different types of pathogens like E. coli, rotavirus, coronavirus, crypto, clostridium, or salmonella. Those are the most common diseases that IgY antibiotics are developed against. So how do these antibodies work when they get inside the intestine? Well, this picture gives you an idea of what that might look like. On the left side of this picture is an example of a whole bunch of different pathogens, bacteria, viruses, protozoa. They're all trying to damage the intestinal sidewall so they can get into the interior of the animal, inside the bloodstream. They can do what they have to do to help get the nutrients that they need to survive and divide and flourish. Because really what these pathogens want to do, they just want to grow. And they want to use the calf's body to be able to do that. But what happens when we've got IgY antibodies floating inside the intestine, because we put it in the milk every feeding, these IgY antibodies that are geared towards the pathogens like rotavirus or coronavirus, the IgY antibodies will, as shown in this picture, will help clump up those pathogens and not allow them to attach to the cells. It won't allow them to do damage to the inside of the intestine. And what happens then is that these pathogens will just be forced to go out the back end of the calf in the manure. So the IgY antibodies help bind up these pathogens so they can attach. So with these IgY powder preparations that go in the milk, typically what they'll do is they'll put in a blend recommended by the manufacturer. Oftentimes they'll increase the dose if a calf is actively sick or actively has diarrhea. And they'll typically be used in that first 14 days of life. They're in a concentrate, you put them in powder and mixed right into the milk, and allows the calves to be easily and conveniently fed at every feeding a level of these IgY antibodies. Another product called SmareCare is a product that was developed by Diamond V for use in milk replacer whole milk that helps support gut health and the productivity of the calf. SmareCare is a similar type of product like Diamond V's flagship products, XPC, and these metabolites are developed to help balance the immune system for the calf. It helps establish the important normal microbes that are within the gut, the type of bacteria that we want to have there, the helpful bacteria. SmareCare is considered a prebiotic because it helps balance the normal bacteria in the gastrointestinal tract, provides that antioxidant activity that supports the immune function, and does a very nice job of decreasing morbidity and mortality, and actually improves calves' growth and average daily gain. So SmareCare is not a single compound. It's a complex of all these different things that happen when yeast is fermented. And it's a long list of beneficial products that are composed of these metabolites, proteins, peptides, antioxidants, all kinds of different types of products in this combination that provides the efficacy of the SmareCare. So the key benefits of SmareCare: improved health and immune development, actually helps improve rumen development, enhances starter intake, and as we already mentioned, improvements in average daily gain. Another example of a yeast byproduct is called MOS, mannan oligosaccharides. There are several companies that make this product. The most common one is manufactured by Alltech, and it's called BioMOS. And mannan is a sugar that are recognized by certain bacteria, including the pathogens of E. coli and Salmonella. And when the oligosaccharide form of this mannan is not available for the pathogen to grow, so it becomes a substitute and doesn't allow the pathogens then to replicate and cause the damage inside the gut. So how does it work? Again, the moss is fed to the calves inside the intestine. The pathogens are tricked into attaching to the mannan sugar instead of the cells within the intestine of the calf. When they attach to that sugar, it doesn't allow the pathogen to attach to the cell wall, and then it causes the pathogen then to go out the back end of the calf in the manure. Same story as we talked about with IgY, only a different mechanism. And by doing that, you prevent the damage to the inside of the intestine, to the villi. So this picture shows what the things that we're talking about. We have the good bacteria present, we've got the pathogens present, we've got a combination of MOS and IgY that tie up the pathogens, and this combination allows even some of the good bacteria to flourish and perpetuate and make the interior of the intestine even better to help ward off further advances of any type of pathogens. MOS is something that is extremely well researched. There's lots and lots of research trials, published ones, that demonstrated decrease in scours, increased starter intake, increase average daily gain. And of course, with any type of research, occasionally you'll run into some that show no effect. There are many, many non-published calf trials that, again, show this similar type of thing, that you have increased starter intake, you have average daily gains in comparison to calves that are fed an NT antibiotic, decreased respiratory disease, decreased coliforms and crypto, and many trials, again, in this non-published calf data, that shows an increase in gain. So there's a preponderance of evidence that shows that MOS is beneficial for use in establishing calf health. Direct-fed microbials, or more commonly called DFMs, are a type of good bug, the beneficial bacteria that we talked about, that create an environment within the intestine that help exclude the pathogens from attaching. If the beneficial bacteria are in good, healthy numbers, the pathogen bacteria, for example, can't compete very well. Examples of these type of DFMs are ones that produce lactic acid, and Lactobacillus acidophilus is an example, and many of these are also bacillus types of bugs, which are very, very stable within the environment of the packaging that these DFMs would come in. Again, there's lots of information in the literature that shows the benefits of drug-fed microbials in calves, and these come in different types of measures: increases in gain, average daily gain, decreases in mortality, all types of different studies that have been done that shows positive impact of DFMs in calves. So how do you decide to pick one? You have to look at a reputable company. You'd have to look at somebody that produces these bacteria in high levels within a dose, typically more than 1 billion colony forming units per day. They have to be a durable bacteria, ones that are going to live, like we talked about with the bacillus. It's helpful if they're resistant to antibiotics, because oftentimes sick calves are given antibiotics. It's nice to have several different types of bacteria, different types of these beneficial bacteria in the product. And the nice thing about these are they're not necessarily expensive. They're a fairly low-cost way to be able to provide a benefit to these calves, and with the ultimate outcome of reestablishing the normal gut bacteria that's in the intestine. Another area of bioactive additive is something called essential oils. And what these are extracts from different plants. And they found that these plant extracts can be used to improve animal productivity. They're generally recognized as being very safe. They come from a variety of different types of plants, and they are becoming to be a more common alternative health strategy to help eliminate things like antibiotic feeding to young animals. So here's an example of a cinnamon aldehyde type of product that's a proprietary combination with some oregano and capsicum. All of these different types of things can be put together in different types of products to show beneficial impact on gut health and ultimately lower scours and better growth. Oregano is a very common essential oil that can be used to improve the gut microflora. So what oregano will do is directly stimulates the bacteria that are in the intestine, and what these type of bacteria can do is actually increase the amount of butyric acid, and the amount of butyric acid can be beneficial then to improve the environment within the intestine, and butyric acid can actually be beneficial in helping stimulate the growth and development of the cells within the intestine. So in addition, as these cells develop, the butyric acid can improve the environment, as we mentioned, to improve the growth of the beneficial bacteria like lactobacillus, which then increases and competes with the pathogens. So you have a decreased ability of the pathogens like E. coli or Clostridia or Salmonella in the intestine to grow and develop. So that's a real basic type of mode of action of an essential oil, using this oregano as an example. Essential oils can have a combination effect where several different oils are put together and have a different mode of action. And this example is one way to be able to describe what kind of benefit that the farm can get for a fairly small inclusion of these oils, and looking at it from a multiple mode of action standpoint to get a benefit to the calf and then to the farm. Another type of bioactive compound are some fatty acids. One of these fatty acids that's fairly common in the marketplace is a product called Neotec 4, which is produced by Provimi, and it's composed of omega-3 fatty acids, some medium chain fatty acids like coconut, palm, and kernel, and it has butyrate, a 4-carbon chain fatty acid that is very common in what we know about in helping develop the cells within the intestine. There's been several good studies that shows the benefit of Neotec 4, decreasing scours, increasing gain, increasing the frame, and increasing feed efficiency. There's a class of bioactives called prebiotics. What they do is help improve the environment within the gut to allow a lot of these beneficial type of bacteria to flourish and then cause the pathogens then to be outcompeted. An example of a prebiotic is FOS. FOS is a very common additive used in milk replacer, oftentimes known as inulin. And it's a sugar that's not broken down until it gets to the hind gut, and it enhances the beneficial bacteria, and as we talked about, decreases the pathogens just through this competitive feature of the beneficial bacteria. The Calf Solutions brand of products have several ways to utilize all these bioactives that we described and different ways to enhance the morbidity and the mortality of these calves and improve the gains and the vigor of the young calf. Several of those products are shown in the slide. That concludes this session of Calf Academy.
Thank you for completing this Calf Academy course. If you have follow-up questions, please contact your Milk Products National Account Manager